Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You actually found some reasons to laugh, not even looking back in your making it part of your material, but day to day in a war crimes court. What did you find funny there?
Well, I think it's just in any kind of dark environment, there's some kind of gallows humor. I don't know if it's a coping mechanism or just the absurdity of the situation. One of the things, there were just funny things that happened from day to day. There was a lot of very serious, very dark stuff, very sad stuff. But the people that I worked with had a really good sense of humor and were able to see the absurdity in, for example, all of these former heads of state and heads of military who were in the detention center. And you have these senior guys who are old, educated, and accused of genocide and crimes against humanity hanging out in this detention unit, doing pottery, doing watercolors, celebrating birthdays, former enemies in the war. And in particular, where I worked was the tribunal that dealt with the former Yugoslavia, and now they find themselves in this environment where they're becoming friends, really, because now they have a common enemy, which is the prosecution, and the fact that they find themselves trying to defend themselves, and they're putting on a big show. A lot of them, some of them choose to defend themselves and do it seriously, and then others take the opportunity to make a show, basically, and obstruct the process to the greatest extent possible.
And there's a bit of a hierarchy within the...
In some places in the detention center, a friend of mine who worked as a defense lawyer actually at the Tribunal for Rwanda, there in the gym, she said that the hierarchy that existed in the military applied at the gym. And so if somebody more senior came along and wanted the treadmill, that guy, the lesser guy, had to get off and cede the treadmill.
It does. When you describe it that way, it does sound like, something from The Simpsons or something. I mean, the backdrop, of course, this, as you say, this very dark reality of trying to untangle what happened during wartime atrocities. In the midst of all that, what was the use for you and for your colleagues of comedy?
The people that I guess I also happen to gravitate to were people with a dark sensibility and that could laugh about things, and that we would talk a lot and share. The stories that we would share were the stories that were funny in the day to day. The war crimes, the accused war criminal who went on hunger strike, and then the report that we got back from the medical staff that just said he needed to lose weight. Those were the kinds of things that when you hang
Sounds
out,
like you're making this stuff up.
No, it's real. I promise.
But as you say, it's partly about the way we talk your
after
humor
work.
skews because for you to see it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
And you were drawn to others who had a similar
right.
humor.
I can't speak for everyone. Like, I don't know if everyone that worked there had a similar sensibility, but there were enough of us that when we hung out after work, other than maybe complaining about, we were living in The Hague, complaining about Dutch food or something like that. Some of the stuff that you talk about, regular office, gossip and that kind of thing. And then some of the ridiculous requests that we have to deal with from these accused who are just there basically to obstruct the process and draw things out. And all of the trials are there's a live feed streaming back to the former Yugoslavia, so they have an audience back home that they're playing to, and some of them were really just very comical. There was a guy named Sheshel who wrote all of these books, I'm putting quotation marks, all of these books while he was in detention, and somehow got things on his website, and he would just insult the judges. I mean, like a real insult comedian. One of the books had many titles, but one of them, for example, was called the Squashed Kangaroo Testicle Kevin Parker, he was an Australian judge, obviously, and this was the title of his. And all he would do was just insult, and then he would file a motion to say that the judge was not going to be impartial because he had written this book. So there was all of these things that people have to deal with, and some of it you have to laugh at.
Well, but then you left eventually,
yeah.
And your intention was to pursue comedy. What shifted to go from working there and finding some humor in it to actually wanting to pursue comedy?
So part of it was that I didn't love the law. I found it a little bit narrow. I wanted to do something more creative. And because I was finding so much humor in my workplace and I was watching a lot of comedy outside of work, it was a time when I wasn't limited to Dutch television. Television started to be on the internet. So I just got this idea in my mind. I thought a lot about things that I'd always wanted to pursue, and comedy was there. And the idea just got so far along in my mind that I just knew that I had to take the time off to at least explore it, write a sitcom based on this war crimes tribunal, which is something I'm working on now with another comedian named Deanne Smith.
I'm trying to envision the
Yeah.
reaction from the family. I've been a successful international lawyer. Now, though, I think I'm going to become a stand-up comedian, a struggling comic, as every starting comic must, by definition, be.
By definition,
how did they react?
For a while, it's kind of telling your parents that you want to go from being a lawyer, a war crimes lawyer, any kind of lawyer, to a comic. I mean, I don't know, maybe the other thing I think that didn't help was I didn't necessarily show a lot of promise at comedy. So I don't think it wasn't like I'd always been doing it or like hilarious. I'm not the kind of person that when I said that I wanted to do it, people said, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Of course, your other great skill and passion.
No, they're like, oh really? Okay, that's so brave. That's really brave. It's sort of like, I think I compare it to when somebody comes out of the closet or they come out as a gay person, that just people come out of the woodwork to ask you, how did you do it? What did your parents say? And they call you brave. Like it's sort of similar.
Well, I mean,
in that respect,
you've also, taken on something that strikes absolute fear right down to the toes of so many people.
Yeah.
The idea of standing up and trying to be funny. I wonder about the your role at the War Crimes Court required you to be impartial and diplomatic. Are those qualities an advantage in any way, or a disadvantage maybe as a comedian?
I think they've been a disadvantage for sure. I think having life experience gives you a lot to draw on. So it's not a traditional comedy route. Obviously, most people maybe go to Second City or Humber. And so I don't suggest necessarily going to work in a war crimes tribunal to build your comedy chops. But there was all of this sort of ingrained diplomacy and way of speaking and writing and expressing yourself that I've been slowly trying to pull those layers off, because in comedy, I think the more direct you can be, the better, the more unvarnished. You can't really think too much about what are people going to think, who am I going to offend. It's not a good starting point for art, I guess, in any respect.
Well, tell me, with that setup then, tell me a little bit about the experience that you had last year at a TEDx conference that helped you become a little less politically correct.
Right. Well, so the topic of the conference was daring greatly, and they had originally asked me to do stand-up comedy, and I said, I don't think that this is a good idea, because people say they want stand-up comedy, and then they put all kinds of limits on you, or they start to worry about what are people going to think. So I suggested, why don't I do a TED Talk about my career change? And it was mostly a talk that was a self-deprecating talk about the step-by-steps to going from being a war crimes lawyer to a stand-up comedian. PowerPoint presentation, everything. But I wanted to explain in the talk about how it was when the part of becoming a comedian at the beginning, I felt an expectation to do this heavy political material, to draw on my experience from the War Crimes Tribunal. But you don't have the skills as a comedian at the beginning to do that. So my jokes initially were kind of sexual in nature. And then over the years, I guess there was a turning point for me when there was the Charter of Values was a topic of discussion in Quebec, a law that was on the table, and this joke came out of that particular legislation, and so that was a turning point for me where I started addressing political stuff in a way that I thought was funny, and the TEDx people were worried that this joke was going to be offensive. Although they had come and seen me do it at a comedy show and laughed a lot and enjoyed it, there was a woman on the that day who wore a veil, which isn't what the joke is about. And they were worried about.
She was another presenter.
She was another presenter. She was worried that somehow, if my joke came before her presentation, people would go in people's minds, and it would somehow affect her credibility as a scientist when she gave her talk. anyways, the solution would have been to have me after her, which would have been fine. But they still worried. They worried about, is it a safe space? Is I don't know. Are people gonna be offended? And so we went back and forth about it. And their line of what's acceptable was basically that you could only do jokes that were about what you are. So in my case, Jewish or gay, I could talk about those groups of people, but I couldn't talk about any other groups of people or my relationship to other people, or even this joke, which is basically about my struggle to understand and be sensitive to another group of people and what that looks like. That was too far for them. So,
What did that experience do in terms of what impact did it have on the kinds of jokes that you want to tell? Because I know you used to sort of take issue with, some right-wing radio jockeys who were really against political correctness, and here you are, maybe starting
That's what made me the most angry about the whole thing. There was a little bit of excitement about being banned from something. I'm not going to lie, because I've always been very, authority. I respected authority. I was good in school. I did. I'm not a rebellious person, really. So being banned was a little something.
I got scratched.
Okay,
I'm blacklisted.
Yeah, that's it. And now I'm a comedian. But I guess what really frustrated me about the whole thing was that I'd always made fun of people who thought that the PC police were the greatest threat that we face in society. And they're basically, most of the time, people that just don't want to adapt to the times and want to hold on to words that are hurtful and are stuck in a time where they want to be able to still make their sexist jokes or their racist jokes or their transphobic jokes or whatever. And now suddenly these people had drawn the line so far that I found myself in that camp with those people that I'd always made fun of. So that's what annoyed me, because now I had these people on Facebook posting the article like, oh, yeah, we told you so. And that's annoying.
But, I mean, it's interesting to, in terms of what comedy, what it takes to make people laugh and the approach that you take in comedy. I mean, do you understand this woman's point of view, the woman that and the TEDx, I guess, in general, the offense that was taken? And do you understand it, but just decide as a comedian that you go, no, I'm going to go there anyway because it's funny to some people? Or
I think in this case, I understand the TEDx people. It's their event. They can make the choices that they want. It's not like my freedom of speech was somehow hindered. I could write an article criticizing them. I could go on stage and tell the joke whenever I want. That hasn't been an issue. So it's not to freak out too much about it. But I did speak to the woman who wears the veil who was on the panel, because I thought that it was just a case of the TEDx people being offended on behalf of her, and that if I spoke to her, she wouldn't really be offended, that she would see where it was coming from. But she was offended, as it turned out, and I tried to talk to her about it, and I didn't quite understand why. Her point of view was that she just thought it was wrong that I had was expressing any kind of discomfort at all with women, the idea of a woman being completely, invisible, basically. And she used the example to say, I don't have any discomfort. I don't judge anybody. I don't judge girls in short shorts. I don't judge people with tattoos or piercings. And, I was like, oh, well, those are just random examples that you just pulled out of nowhere. We all do. And I think it's okay to talk about stuff if you're coming at it from the right perspective. And for me, I did care enough to try to understand what the offense was. But at a certain point, after I've questioned myself and what is the point of this joke, and is this important, and are people relating to it, and is it exposing some kind of truth and some kind of discussion maybe some people are having within themselves, then I have to stand by it. And
So do you feel, I mean, you said that you left being a lawyer because you wanted to do something more creative. Do you feel a transformation now? Do you feel that sense of fulfillment through comedy? Do you feel creatively challenged in ways that just feel better?
Yeah, it does. I'm starting to find myself and my voice on stage, and it's great. It's so much fun. I mean, comedy is so immediately gratifying because you just put things out there. You can think of a joke and go up and do an open mic that night, and you can drink on the job. That's great too. But there is a lot. It's just open. You can really, stand up is sort of this bastion of free speech, as it should be. Where there aren't any real limitations on it, so it is very fulfilling. And slowly I'm feeling more and more like a comedian and not like a lawyer.
It's exciting to see and think about where you'll go next. Thank you so much for being here, and
Thank you.
all the best
Thanks for having
with your
me.
brave career choice.
Yeah, right. So brave.